Earth had always been quiet. Not in the way that makes you think of serenity or peace, but quiet in a stubborn, almost defiant way. While the rest of the galaxy had long since joined councils, alliances, and summits that spanned star systems, humans had ignored every invitation. Officially, the galaxy thought of us as primitive, unpredictable, and unworthy of attention. Unofficially, some whispered that Earth's refusal to participate was intriguing, but most didn't care. Until today. The day started like any other, with people rushing through their morning routines, completely oblivious to the signals bouncing off satellites in orbit, signals that would have made any other species' collective heart race with alarm. Messages, repeated in countless frequencies and languages, reached Earth, pleading for a response, demanding acknowledgement. Every council, every summit, every galactic envoy Earth had ignored them all. And maybe the galaxy had learned to forget about the stubborn blue planet. But there were things in the void, things that didn't forget. It began with whispers in orbit, tiny blips on long-range scanners that no one on Earth could interpret. A commercial pilot flying across the Pacific reported seeing fleets like tiny stars moving against the darkness of space. Air traffic control dismissed it. Newspapers, caught up in politics and celebrity scandals, never touched the story. Scientists argued over anomalies in the data, most assuming it was equipment error. But deep down, everyone who had access to the real-time feeds felt it, the uneasy sense that something was coming. Something massive. And then the first warning lights appeared, not alarms, not announcements. Just a strange, almost imperceptible flicker on the military satellites, a pattern that repeated itself across every orbital sensor. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't friendly. The realization hit slowly, like a cold wave rolling across the back of the neck. Earth had never been ready for this. Not in technology, not in strategy, not in mindset. For centuries, humans had built their civilizations, assuming the universe was vast but distant. They had assumed it could wait. That assumption, as it turned out, might have been their deadliest mistake. In the sky above major cities, ordinary people began to notice the subtle changes first. A faint glow on the horizon, satellites dropping offline without explanation, communications looping and distorting. Pilots reported interference, entire airspaces going dark for minutes at a time. On the news, anchors struggled to explain it, their faces tightening with a tension they couldn't fully conceal. Something had entered the solar system, and it was huge. Not just a few ships' fleets. Thousands of them. Back on Earth, scientists and military officials scrambled. Desperate messages were sent to friendly nations, but coordination was slow. Every protocol, every contingency plan for first contact had assumed diplomacy first, combat only if necessary. But what happens when there's no time for diplomacy? When the visitor doesn't wait for explanations? The sense of impending doom grew heavier by the hour. Earthlings who had been stubbornly ignoring the galaxy now realized that the galaxy, or perhaps the part of it that mattered, was ignoring their protests entirely. And then it happened. From the dark expanse just beyond Pluto, a shape emerged. It was enormous, larger than anything Earth's telescopes had ever captured. The void itself seemed to shiver as more shapes followed, forming an endless line of vessels, each one gleaming like metal giants under the dim light of the distant sun. Analysts counted and recounted the ships. Their numbers kept climbing hundreds, then thousands, until the total became almost incomprehensible. A 2,000-vessel battle armada had appeared from the void, and its direction was clear, Earth. On the ground, people were still waking up to the reality of what was happening. Governments were calling emergency meetings, but every decision felt like a guess. The human race, long ignored by the galaxy, suddenly faced a scale of threat it had never imagined. And somewhere in the void, beyond the reach of satellites and sensors, the Armada waited, silent, patient, unforgiving. No one knew why Earth had been targeted. Was it a punishment? A warning? Or had humanity's defiance simply drawn attention to itself in a universe where attention often equaled destruction? The answer didn't matter. What mattered was survival, and right now, survival seemed like a distant hope. As the first ships breached the outer edges of the solar system, the planet collectively held its breath, unaware that history, or perhaps the future of humanity itself, was about to be rewritten in fire and metal. And then, just as Earth's leaders were preparing to respond, a transmission arrived from the Armada. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a greeting. It was a single line, broadcast across every frequency at once. You will not survive the next hour if you fail to understand why you are here. Silence fell across the globe. And in that silence, a terrible question echoed in every mind. What had humans ignored that now could no longer be avoided? No one had ever seen anything like it. Across command centers, living rooms, and classrooms, people stared at screens and telescopes, unable to look away. Analysts tried to piece together what the Armada's message could mean. Was it a test? A threat? A declaration of war? Some suggested it might even be a form of communication humans had never experienced before, one that required understanding beyond words. But the sense of urgency was undeniable. Earth had no more time to delay. The strange thing was that, despite the looming threat, most people reacted the only way humans know how, by keeping busy. Pilots recalibrated flight plans, engineers ran simulations, and military strategists debated options that felt like grasping at shadows. Governments held emergency sessions that went on for hours, trying to reconcile centuries of peace with the reality of the 2,000-vessel Armada waiting just beyond the Kuiper Belt. Yet for every plan proposed, there was always a question that couldn't be answered. How could Earth possibly face a force that had spent millennia among the stars? Among those working late into the night were scientists who had long warned that ignoring galactic signals might have consequences. They sifted through archives of intercepted communications, ancient astronomical data, and theoretical models, looking for a pattern, a clue, anything that could explain why the Armada had come. Some theories were dismissed quickly. Others were unsettling enough to keep people awake for nights on end, that humanity had unknowingly trespassed, or that ignoring the council was no longer something that could be forgiven. And then there were those who wondered if the very act of being observed, unnoticed for so long, had finally drawn attention that was not benign. In the skies above, satellites and space stations were suddenly more than tools, they were lifelines. Engineers monitored the Armada's approach, watching as the ships moved with precision and coordination that defied human logic. Each vessel appeared to anticipate the other's movements, forming a lattice of power that seemed almost alive. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, a reminder that humanity had only ever scratched the surface of the universe's potential. And yet, the beauty was also a threat, a constant reminder that the world below might not survive what was coming. Across cities, people began noticing subtle changes in their surroundings. Communications flickered, power grids fluctuated, and even weather patterns behaved strangely. Some scientists suggested the Armada's presence could be affecting the planet physically, a gravitational pull or an unknown form of energy disrupting Earth itself. Others thought it was paranoia, a side effect of fear. But as the hours passed, the anomalies intensified. Planes diverted mid-flight, satellites went dark, and radio signals became scrambled with strange static patterns. Whatever the Armada was capable of, it wasn't waiting for permission, it was already here, in ways that humans could barely measure. On the ground, humanity's leaders tried to maintain control. Press conferences were held, but their words often rang hollow. "We are assessing the situation," one official said, "and preparing appropriate responses." The tone was calm, almost reassuring, but behind closed doors, the mood was different. Advisors argued over whether to respond with weapons, diplomacy, or a combination of both. Some argued that Earth's stubbornness had painted a target on the planet, and that any sudden move could trigger a disaster. Others felt that indecision itself was a form of death. Among the ordinary people, fear was a quiet companion. Families gathered to watch the skies, children asked questions their parents could not answer, and neighbors shared theories over glowing phone screens. Social media exploded with speculation, images, and amateur calculations of how fast the Armada was approaching. Rumors traveled faster than verified facts, and yet beneath the panic, a strange sense of unity began to form. Humans, for once, were facing something beyond politics, beyond borders, beyond the petty conflicts that had always divided them. For better or worse, the world was becoming aware of itself in a way it never had before. Meanwhile, some scientists noticed a pattern among the ships. Their formations weren't random. They were deliberate, almost ritualistic. The movement suggested purpose beyond attack. It hinted at intelligence that humans could not yet grasp. Could the Armada be testing humanity? Studying humans before deciding their fate? Or was this all simply the prelude to something unstoppable? Every attempt to decode the signals ended in frustration, as if the universe itself was daring humans to understand. And then there was the mystery of the message. You will not survive the next hour if you fail to understand why you are here. Nobody knew what it meant. It wasn't a riddle that could be solved with math or science alone. It demanded something more: intuition, courage, perhaps even a willingness to see humanity as part of a much larger story. For some, it was a warning. For others, it was an invitation. And yet, no one had the faintest idea how to respond. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first ships of the Armada became visible to the naked eye, tiny glimmers of metal that seemed to float impossibly in the void. In that moment, people stopped what they were doing. Phones were forgotten. Work paused. Everyone stared upward, united by the same unanswerable question: what did the universe want with Earth? And somewhere, just beyond reach, the Armada waited, silent, patient, watching, and the planet's defenders knew one terrifying truth. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The night sky was no longer just a backdrop for stars. It had become a theater of tension. From the streets of the world's busiest cities to the quiet countryside, people stared upward, watching the distant glimmers of the Armada grow brighter with every passing hour. Scientists argued over the exact speed of the vessels, but the truth was simple: Earth had no margin for error. Every calculation, every model, every contingency plan felt like a fragile illusion. The Armada wasn't just approaching, it was reshaping the rules of survival. Inside a crowded command center, analysts worked feverishly. Screens displayed feeds from satellites, telescopes, and radar arrays, forming a chaotic mosaic of the incoming fleet. Some of the ships were enormous, larger than anything humanity had ever imagined, while others moved with the precision of swarming predators. Every formation told a story, but no one could read it. Military officers argued over whether to engage or retreat, but their words sounded hollow. They had no way of knowing if Earth's weapons could even scratch the surface of these vessels. Meanwhile, ordinary people were becoming part of the story. Pilots grounded flights, worried about interference from unknown energies. Fishermen in remote harbors reported strange tides, as if the Armada's presence was tugging at Earth itself. News outlets ran non-stop coverage, and while much of it was speculation, some reports were chillingly accurate. Ships were approaching every major city's orbital path simultaneously, moving as though they were aware of Earth's weaknesses. Panic simmered under the surface, but for the first time, a quiet determination began to emerge. Humans were facing something they could not ignore, and for better or worse, they had to act. The political landscape shifted almost overnight. Nations that had long been at odds now scrambled to share information, resources, and strategies. Emergency councils convened, but the usual debates over power and territory were replaced with a singular question: how do we survive what is coming? Some leaders pushed for immediate communication attempts, broadcasting signals in hopes of reason or negotiation. Others demanded defensive measures, stockpiling weapons and rerouting missiles. Every decision felt incomplete, as if the real rules of engagement had yet to be written. Amid this chaos, there were voices trying to make sense of the Armada's intentions. A small team of scientists noticed that the ships weren't just moving, they were observing. Sensors detected pulses of energy that seemed designed to scan, almost like a cosmic probe. One researcher suggested that the Armada might be testing humanity, or even offering a choice: demonstrate understanding or face consequences. It was a terrifying notion. Could the survival of the species hinge on comprehension rather than firepower? And if so, what exactly did the fleet want humans to understand? On the streets, life carried on in surreal ways. People gathered in small groups, looking up at the sky, exchanging theories and stories. Some shared ancient myths and legends, trying to find parallels in history. Others relied on modern science, searching for patterns in the movements of the Armada. In the midst of fear, there was connection, a strange, fragile thread tying humans together against a threat larger than any one nation. Children asked questions adults couldn't answer, and parents clutched their hands tighter, realizing that the future of the world was now a matter of minutes, not years. Meanwhile, rumors of sabotage and espionage spread. Some nations suspected that certain members of the scientific community were withholding information, perhaps fearing panic or misunderstanding. Others warned of hackers attempting to manipulate satellite feeds to hide or exaggerate the Armada's numbers. Trust became scarce, and yet humanity had no time for suspicion, not when the fleet was so close and every second mattered. The tension wasn't just in space. It was here on Earth, in the minds of everyone trying to hold the planet together. And then there were the transmissions. Intermittent signals, often indecipherable, echoed across the globe. Some contained strange symbols, patterns that seemed to shift when observed. Others were bursts of energy, short pulses that disrupted electronics for seconds at a time. Experts debated endlessly whether the transmissions were warnings, instructions, or tests. Whatever they were, it was clear the Armada wasn't mindless. It was deliberate, intelligent, and patient, waiting for humans to make the next move. In quiet corners of the world, ordinary heroes began to emerge. Engineers improvised ways to protect infrastructure. Amateur astronomers calculated ship movements with shocking accuracy. Volunteers coordinated evacuation routes and emergency supplies. It was imperfect, chaotic, and often terrifying, but it was humanity trying. For the first time, the stubbornness that had once isolated Earth now became a form of resilience. The planet might not yet survive the Armada, but humans were refusing to go quietly into the void. And yet, the core question remained unanswered. Why had the Armada come? Was it punishment, curiosity, or something humans couldn't yet comprehend? Every theory sparked more questions than answers, and as the ships drew closer, it became impossible to ignore the truth. Earth was no longer just a backwater planet ignored by the galaxy. The moment of reckoning was here, and every human being, from the highest leaders to the smallest children, was about to discover that defiance and survival might be inseparably intertwined. As the first tendrils of light from the Armada crossed the outer solar system, a tense silence gripped the world. No one moved, no one spoke. All that remained was watching, waiting, and wondering. What would happen when the fleet finally revealed its purpose? The first signs of real movement came before dawn, when the Armada slipped past the outer planets with a precision that made Earth's satellites seem sluggish in comparison. At command centers around the globe, technicians and scientists stared at screens in disbelief. Hundreds of vessels adjusted their positions almost simultaneously, forming patterns that were more intricate than any human mind could fully understand. For a moment, the world held its breath, waiting for the first strike, or perhaps the first word. City streets were eerily quiet. People had evacuated major hubs, while others stayed, driven by fear, curiosity, or a stubborn need to witness history unfold. The glow of the ships could now be seen without telescopes, a constellation of steel and energy that dwarfed the moon. Children clutched their parents' hands, staring upward with a mix of awe and terror. No one could deny it. Humanity had reached a turning point. The planet that had once ignored the galaxy was now under its gaze in a way that felt immediate, personal, and unavoidable. Inside the world's defense networks, tension was at a breaking point. Generals barked orders that were impossible to fulfill, satellites were rerouted in frantic improvisation, and drones and missiles were prepped with more hope than confidence. Scientists scrambled to understand the Armada's formations, noting strange behaviors. Some ships moved as if they were mapping the Earth's magnetic fields, while others seemed to hover in patterns meant to intimidate. The intelligence behind the fleet was staggering. Every decision humans made seemed anticipated, every maneuver countered before it could be completed. It was no longer a battle of firepower, it was a battle of understanding, and Earth was scrambling to catch up. In homes across the planet, ordinary humans felt the pressure in their own ways. Families huddled together, sharing whispered theories about the fleet's motives. People with no experience in science or defense found themselves teaching neighbors how to interpret satellite feeds, plotting potential evacuation routes, and calculating what little time remained. Some were struck by a strange exhilaration, a sense that humanity was being forced into its truest test, a challenge that would reveal who we really were. Others felt nothing but a sinking dread, convinced that survival was already slipping out of reach. Amid the chaos, transmissions from the Armada grew more frequent and precise. Pulses of light and coded bursts of energy disrupted communications, forcing humans to rely on intuition and improvisation. A small group of linguists and mathematicians worked around the clock, trying to decode the symbols, the patterns, the messages hidden in the signals. Each breakthrough was tiny, fleeting, and often contradicted the last. But it was progress, and in a moment when progress seemed impossible, it became a lifeline. Then, from the edge of the solar system, the first probes arrived. Small, sleek vessels, almost invisible at first, slipped through Earth's defenses, mapping, scanning, observing. They were not violent, but their presence carried the weight of inevitability. For many, it was proof that the Armada was no mere threat. It was a force of judgment. Humans realized that understanding might not just save them, it might be the only thing that could. Tension rippled through governments and military leaders. Every second brought new decisions: attempt communication or prepare for combat, focus on evacuation or risk staying to defend critical locations, trust allies or act independently. Every choice seemed to carry consequences that were both global and deeply personal. In offices and bunkers around the world, leaders felt the same fear that ordinary citizens did, a fear that this moment could decide the fate of the entire species. As the sun rose over the horizon, the Armada's size became fully apparent. Thousands of ships glinted in the sunlight, their surfaces reflecting the planet they had come to observe. From every angle, they looked overwhelming, unstoppable, precise. Analysts estimated that any attempt at direct attack would be futile. The fleet was too large, too coordinated, too intelligent. Earth's defenses were not just inadequate, they were irrelevant. And yet humans continued to organize, to fight, to prepare. On the streets, people watched as the sky darkened with the shadow of the approaching vessels. Drones from various countries hovered above, capturing footage that would later become historical documentation of the first day humanity realized it was not alone and that the universe was not indifferent. In this moment, there was no politics, no borders, no rivalry, only the shared tension of survival. The planet collectively held its breath, waiting for the next move, unsure if it would be a strike, a message, or something no one could predict. And then, just as the first major ships entered geosynchronous orbit, a sudden pulse of light streaked from the fleet. It wasn't a weapon, not in the conventional sense. It was a signal, but one so intense, so overwhelming, that it disrupted communications across half the planet. Satellites went offline, radio waves twisted, and even some power grids faltered. For a brief moment, humanity experienced what it meant to be completely at the mercy of a force it did not understand. Every human being, from the highest leaders to the smallest children watching from their windows, felt the same terrifying realization: the moment of reckoning had arrived. The Armada was here, it was observing. And whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The sky pulsed again. A low hum, like the vibration of the entire solar system, resonated through the air and the ground alike. Hearts raced, hands trembled, and the planet held its collective breath, suspended between awe and terror. The Armada had made its presence undeniable. And now, the question that had haunted humans for decades, the question no one had the answer to, hung over the world with impossible weight. What did the fleet want, and would humanity survive long enough to find out? The hum in the sky lingered, vibrating through the ground, through the air, through the very nerves of everyone awake to witness it. People had expected a fleet of ships, yes, but nothing could have prepared them for the scale of intelligence behind it. And just when humanity thought the unknown was all they had to worry about, the first real shock came. The Armada began to split. From the outer edges of the formation, hundreds of smaller ships detached, moving toward Earth at unprecedented speed. Unlike the main vessels, which maintained a steady, almost ceremonial pattern, these new crafts darted with erratic precision, weaving between satellites and even disappearing from radar before reappearing seconds later. Command centers erupted into chaos. Analysts shouted over each other, trying to track every movement, but the numbers were overwhelming. Each human calculation felt hopelessly slow, and yet every second counted. Then came the second revelation, one that no one had anticipated. The smaller crafts were not alone. From each ship, tiny drones poured out, invisible to the naked eye but detectable through electromagnetic interference. They swarmed like a storm, scanning, probing, even altering the signals of Earth's satellites in ways no one could decipher. Communications scrambled, early warning systems failed, and for the first time, humanity felt the weight of vulnerability in a visceral, unavoidable way. The Armada wasn't just observing, they were testing, mapping, learning. Every human strategy, every precaution was now under scrutiny. In homes and bunkers across the planet, people realized this was not a conventional attack. The fleet had not fired a single shot, and yet the tension was unbearable. Governments attempted emergency broadcasts, urging calm, but even the most composed voices faltered when satellite feeds went dark mid-sentence. Ordinary citizens, accustomed to information at their fingertips, felt a helplessness that was almost physical. The hum grew louder, synchronized with pulses of light from the approaching ships. It wasn't just a sound, it was a signal of power, a demonstration that Earth's defenses could be rendered useless without a single act of aggression. Amid the chaos, a small group of scientists stumbled upon a pattern in the drone's movements. It wasn't random. The swarm formed shapes, almost like symbols, circling Earth in intricate designs that suggested a language or perhaps a warning. Some proposed that the Armada's earlier message, "You will not survive the next hour if you fail to understand why you are here," had layers humans could not yet grasp. This wasn't about battle or conquest, it was about comprehension. And yet, while some humans tried to decipher it, others panicked. Fear spread faster than understanding, and the planet's social fabric began to fray under the pressure. The military, desperate to assert control, launched unmanned interceptors toward the fastest-moving vessels. The result was instantaneous and terrifying. The drones responded in perfect synchronization, disabling the interceptors with energy pulses that melted circuits without a sound. Human weapons were useless. Earth had prepared for war with missiles, lasers, and drones, but nothing in history, nothing in imagination, had prepared them for an enemy that could neutralize technology faster than it could be deployed. The Armada had escalated the conflict in ways humans were only beginning to comprehend. Meanwhile, across the world, ordinary people made choices that would define their place in history. Families abandoned cars and fled on foot when automated traffic systems failed. Cities lit up with emergency signals, while individuals formed impromptu networks to share information, guide others, and maintain a semblance of order. The stakes were no longer theoretical. Humanity's survival was immediate, tangible, and terrifyingly fragile. The planet had been ignored by the galaxy for centuries, but now every action, every hesitation had consequences that were impossible to calculate. Then came the second twist, one that no one saw coming. The Armada's main vessels, which had until now remained in steady orbit, began to descend closer to Earth's upper atmosphere. They did not fire, they did not communicate. They simply lowered themselves, massive shadows stretching over cities and oceans, cutting off sunlight in a manner so precise it suggested intent. People looked up in horror and awe as the sky became a living ceiling of alien metal and energy. It was a statement, a warning, and a challenge all at once. Humanity had never felt so small, and yet the planet's inhabitants were beginning to feel a stirring, a need to respond, to act, to survive. Across continents, analysts realized the timing of the swarm and the descent was no accident. The smaller crafts were mapping, learning, and testing, while the main fleet established dominance. Earth's defenses were fragmented, its population tense and fearful, and its leaders unsure of whether to negotiate, flee, or fight. Every path forward seemed uncertain. The Armada had introduced a new variable: patience as a weapon, intelligence as intimidation, and fear as a tool. Humans had believed their survival relied on firepower, but now it was clear that understanding and quick thinking would be just as critical. In homes, bunkers, and observation posts, the world collectively held its breath. No one could predict what would happen next. Every pulse of light, every hum, every movement of the drones was a question demanding an answer. Humanity was being tested, pushed to the edge, and every second brought them closer to a revelation that might save them, or doom them. The sky was alive with unknown power, and the planet beneath it was trembling with uncertainty. And then, just before silence fell, the first coordinated transmission came not from a single ship, but across the entire Armada. A wave of energy, synchronized with the drones and the descending vessels, pulsed outward in a pattern that no human eye could fully follow. For those who could perceive it, a single terrifying thought emerged. The Armada had revealed the next phase of the test. Whatever humanity did next, it would define the outcome in ways that no one, not even the most prepared leaders, could predict. The Armada's pulse had spread across the planet, a wave of energy so precise that it felt alive. For a moment the world paused, humans, satellites, drones, every system frozen under the weight of an unseen force. And then, the first clear sign of communication emerged, not in words or symbols, but as a vibration that resonated through every human mind who focused on it. It was subtle at first, almost like a hum in the background of thought, and then it became undeniable. A message. Not broadcast, not written, but felt, understood intuitively. Humans scattered across the planet felt it in different ways. Some perceived shapes, patterns in the night sky that rearranged themselves with purpose. Others experienced flashes of clarity, sudden comprehension of math, physics, and strategy that had seemed beyond reach minutes before. It was as if the Armada had unlocked a higher level of awareness, forcing humanity to see the universe through their eyes. Panic melted into awe, fear into determination. The fleet wasn't just testing Earth's strength, it was testing humanity's ability to understand, adapt, and evolve. Military leaders who had spent hours arguing over missiles and drones found themselves reassessing every plan. Weapons seemed irrelevant now. Understanding was the true path forward. Scientists raced to interpret the patterns, aligning their calculations with the subtle signals pulsing across the sky. Every maneuver of the fleet suddenly made sense not as an attack but as guidance. Earth's survival depended not on firepower, but on insight, collaboration, and instinctive human creativity. Then the smaller crafts descended. Unlike before, they moved deliberately, matching the patterns humans had just begun to understand. Cities and remote regions alike held their breath as the drones hovered over structures, scanning, analyzing, and somehow miraculously beginning to interact without destruction. For the first time, humans realized the Armada was not here to destroy, but to challenge. It wanted to see if Earth could rise to the occasion, if the species that had ignored the galaxy for so long could finally participate in a cosmic conversation. Communication became clearer. Pulses of light synchronized with the drones, forming shapes that mirrored human concepts of language. Scientists and linguists, working feverishly, discovered they could manipulate these symbols, sending signals back in coordinated response. Every attempt was a test. Patience, timing, accuracy, and creativity mattered more than firepower. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival, it was demonstrating worthiness. The climax of the encounter came when the Armada's largest ships shifted position above the equator, creating a bridge of energy that connected their vessels in a lattice over the planet. The hum intensified until it was almost tangible, vibrating through buildings, mountains, and oceans. Then came a moment of universal clarity. Every human who had observed and interacted with the signals felt a singular truth. The Armada had been patient, deliberate, and intelligent, but its purpose had been misunderstood. They hadn't come merely to punish or threaten. They had come to invite Earth into the galaxy's greater network of civilizations, to see if humans could grasp the responsibility of knowledge and collaboration. But just as relief began to spread across the globe, a new anomaly appeared. One of the main vessels, previously stationary and silent, detached and accelerated toward the sun. The entire fleet paused. All signals frozen for a heartbeat, and the hum faltered. Humanity's collective mind sensed tension. This ship carried the final test, one no one could fully predict. Then, in a brilliant flash, it disappeared into the sun, triggering a chain reaction across the Armada. Ships pulsed, flashed, and reconfigured themselves as if responding to something unseen, leaving humans on Earth stunned and breathless. Leaders realized that the fleet's ultimate lesson was not obedience, not calculation, not even communication alone, it was humility. Humanity had to accept the vastness of the galaxy, its unknowns, and its consequences. The test had pushed the planet to the edge, forcing collaboration and insight under pressure. But the final act reminded humans that power and survival were not guarantees, they were privileges. The Armada had given Earth knowledge, awareness, and opportunity, but also a reminder of fragility. As the sun's corona flared, the remaining ships began to retreat, slowly dissolving back into the void from which they had come. The drones followed, leaving behind traces of energy that hummed faintly in the atmosphere, reminders of what had transpired. Humanity had survived, adapted, and demonstrated its value, but the sense of wonder and fear lingered. For the first time in history, Earth had not been ignored by the galaxy. And then came the final twist. Sensors detected a ripple in space beyond Pluto, faint but unmistakable, a signal from a second Armada, even larger and further away than the first. It was a pulse, a promise, a question, and a warning all at once. Humanity had passed one test, but the universe had many more waiting. The planet exhaled, but the story was far from over. Earth had been noticed, had survived, had learned, but the galaxy had not finished watching. The stakes were higher than ever, and humanity's next move would define not just survival, but its place among the stars. The sky was quiet now, though the memory of the Armada lingered like an echo in every mind. The hum had faded, the drones had vanished, and the massive vessels had returned to the void from which they had appeared. For the first time in centuries, humanity felt the galaxy watching, and it was no longer a distant thought. Earth had been tested, challenged, and observed, and the planet had survived. More than survived, it had learned. Governments and scientists across the world worked through the night, piecing together the signals, the symbols, and the energy pulses left behind by the fleet. Every calculation and theory brought new understanding. Humans began to see the patterns, the subtle rules that had governed the Armada's behavior. It wasn't just a demonstration of power. It was a lesson in patience, intelligence, and humility. The aliens had not come to destroy, they had come to teach. People emerged from bunkers, homes, and evacuation centers into a world that felt both familiar and transformed. Streets were filled with quiet awe as families, neighbors, and strangers shared experiences, observations, and questions about what had just occurred. Children, who had once looked at the stars as distant lights, now stared with curiosity, understanding that the universe was far larger, more complex, and more intelligent than they had ever imagined. Even ordinary citizens who had never followed science closely felt a shift within themselves, a deeper awareness of the vastness beyond Earth and the responsibility that came with surviving a first encounter with an interstellar intelligence. In the scientific community, breakthroughs came at a staggering pace. The drone's energy pulses had left traces in the atmosphere and in satellites that suggested entirely new possibilities for communication, energy generation, and space exploration. Teams worked tirelessly, inspired by the fact that humanity had been granted, in a way, a glimpse into a higher understanding. Every discovery became a reminder that survival was not only about power, it was about learning, observing, and cooperating. Leaders of nations realized that the experience had changed the way humans thought about unity. The conflicts that had once divided them seemed small in comparison to the scale of the galaxy. Emergency coalitions remained, not out of fear, but as a conscious choice to work together. Humanity had learned that in order to face the unknown, cooperation was not optional. Borders and rivalries, though still present, now felt like minor obstacles in the face of what the universe could throw at them next. Yet there was also caution. Even as humans celebrated survival, the ripple from the distant Second Armada lingered in the collective awareness. The first encounter had been a test, and the second signaled that the universe's gaze was patient and far-reaching. Earth was no longer isolated, and every choice the planet made would now be observed on scales previously unimaginable. The lesson was clear: survival was possible, but complacency was deadly. Humanity had to remain vigilant, adaptable, and ready to rise again when the next challenge arrived. Across the world, ordinary heroes, engineers, scientists, pilots, and everyday citizens received recognition in quiet, heartfelt ways. Communities honored those who had guided others, calculated patterns, or kept calm under pressure. The planet had survived not because of a single leader or technology, but because humans, collectively, had risen to the challenge. Courage, collaboration, and creativity had proved more powerful than weapons or force. This was a lesson that would echo through generations. As Earth settled back into routine, the sky remained a reminder of what had happened. At night, stars seemed brighter, as though humanity could sense the eyes that had watched them. The world had been reminded of its fragility, its potential, and its responsibility. Every human now carried a sense of connection to something far greater, an awareness that survival required not just action, but thought, understanding, and a willingness to grow. In quiet moments, people reflected on the message left by the Armada. Knowledge was the key to survival, and the ability to understand the unknown defined humanity's place in the universe. Fear had tested them, doubt had tried to divide them, but the planet had endured. And while the future remained uncertain, the lesson was clear. Earth had survived its first test, and the species was ready, at least for now, for the challenges yet to come. And so life resumed? Children returned to schools, cities buzzed with energy, and scientists looked to the skies with purpose rather than dread. Humans had learned that being noticed by the galaxy was not just a threat, it was an opportunity. The planet had survived, grown wiser, and understood that every choice mattered. The stars above were no longer distant. They were reminders of responsibility, of vigilance, and of potential. Humanity had endured, and the universe had noticed. But somewhere, far beyond the edges of the solar system, the faint pulse of another presence continued to watch, a quiet signal waiting for the moment when Earth would be tested again. Humanity had survived, but the story of its place in the galaxy was only just beginning.